From the Times and the Sunday Times, this is The Story. I'm Luke Jones.
And I'm Manveen Rana.
Together at last.
We don't often get to do this.
Putting to bed the rumour that we are the same person.
Have we, though? Nobody can see us.
Oh, yeah, good point. Could have been a very good ventriloquist
We're
act.
not usually allowed in a studio together at the same time, but this is a rarity.
Because of the workload.
Because of the workload, because the news has been relentless. There's been such an onslaught, and so many of you have got in touch with questions about what's been happening.
TheStoryAtTheTimes.com.
Do feel free to drop us a line, and we thought we'd take this opportunity to answer some of your questions.
We're going to be talking about ICE, Immigration Customs Enforcement in Minneapolis in the US, the psychodrama of Westminster defections and blocked Manchester mayors here in the UK, and also what is happening with Iran.
What is happening with Iran?
The evergreen question.
We'll try and provide you with as many answers as we can, but let's have a look at some of the questions.
Right, let's start with Iran. So there's that standoff we've got at the moment, a fresh standoff between the US and Iran. Manveen, what is happening now and how is it different to what we've seen in years gone by?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, we should say we're recording this on Thursday morning. This should drop in your feed later today. And as things stand, we've had a huge war of words between the president and the Iranians, all on social media, which is very weird. Very weird. Lots of capital letters. That's when you know it's serious. Lots of threats and counter-threats. President Trump has told everybody his armada. Keeps calling it that, and I sort of think if you're British, that has all sorts of other associations. They don't tend to work out well. But, his armada is on its way. You know, it's in Middle Eastern waters, heading towards Iran, which is a massive threat. And it's to show that they really mean it this time. You know, they're backing up their words with actions. And the Iranians are saying, if you want to have a proper discussion, if you want to talk about deals, we want to do it in a respectful way. But if you want war, then we will certainly take that on.
And just remind us, this isn't necessarily directly about all the unrest that we've seen in Iran in the past few weeks. This is about that deal which collapsed back in the last Trump presidency about Iran's enriching of uranium to the extent that it could make nuclear weapons with it.
It's a really good question, because I think that's actually the bit that is the least clear. We're not quite sure what the aims of this particular, sending the armada are. We've had President Trump tweeting in the last couple of weeks about the protests, about protesters being killed, and how he would, if any of them were executed, there would be an impact for Iran, and he would be deploying weapons. I think he said he was locked and loaded. He's told protesters that he's coming to help them, keep the names of people who are torturing you, and there will be some sort of retribution. And yet that's probably not what this is about. A bit like Venezuela, there may be a terrible regime in place, but when America arrives, they don't necessarily change it because that's too difficult a problem.
Yeah. This
does seem to be about trying to get a new deal on nuclear, and probably also on, if you think about the last year, it's been a disaster for Iran. It's so many of its proxies like Hezbollah and, the Houthis in Yemen have taken huge hits. And so it'll probably be about how they operate in the future, Iranian support to them. It'll be about nuclear. He wants a tougher deal than they had with the JCPOA last time. I mean, it'll be a long list of things he wants, but whether the Iranians are likely to sign up to them, even in their weakened position, is another question.
Tony sent a question, which we sort of slightly already answered, but he says, where is the US fleet located? I'm due to fly to the area and I'm a little bit concerned. So you're mentioning there's that strike group.
That's a really good question. So this armada, the strike group, we know it's on its way towards Iran. We don't quite know where.
And from Venezuela, actually, because this is the USS Abraham Lincoln.
It's coming from different places. So from Venezuela, some are sort of coming from the Pacific. But basically, there's sort of a sense that it's on its way. We think it's entered Middle Eastern waters, but we don't. I sort of want somebody to have a tracker, like you do with flights, just telling us exactly where it is. If it had passed the Strait of Hormuz, we'd know. We know that the Americans have a huge base, a naval base in Bahrain, which is the home of the US Fifth Fleet. But it would be really surprising if they wanted to go that far in, because you'd have to pass the Strait of Hormuz, which is a very narrow bit of the sea.
The bit where the Houthis were firing missiles at all those ships going through.
It's the bit where sort of, if you imagine the UAE and Dubai, it sort of juts out towards...
They're on your left, Iran is on your right.
Yeah, exactly, towards Iran. And so it's the thinnest bit, and it's really vital. The Iranians are saying that if you do want war, just remember, we can basically close that bit of sea, which is catastrophic. So if you imagine where the Strait of Hormuz is, you've got the UAE sticking out. Just above it, you've got a wider stretch of sea, but, it doesn't have any other outlet. Everything has to pass through there. And that links up Iraq and all the Kurdish oil fields, all the oil tankers coming from a lot of the Middle East, from Kuwait, all have to pass through that stretch of water, through the Strait of Hormuz, in order to reach the rest of us, basically. So it could be catastrophic for energy prices. It would be a disaster for the world economy for a while.
But to Tony's point about being concerned about flying to the area, I take your point that this strike group's already on its way. But as you mentioned, there's a US base already in Bahrain, there's one in Qatar, there's one in Jordan. Actually, a lot of mischief can be made.
A lot of mischief can be made.
Without there being a strike group there already.
Yeah, and in the past we have seen, the last time there was an exchange of fire between the Israelis and the Iranians, Qatar has ended up with explosions on its ground. Iraq, there are American bases still in Iraq. They tend to be sort of vulnerable. To be honest, with the Armada itself, it's really hard to see how it's going to get anywhere near that particular patch because it's such a narrow bit of sea. Naval experts would tell you that it would just make them really vulnerable. So while an Armada looks great and really powerful because it's sort of, these huge giant aircraft carriers and all their sort of the little boats around them sort of chugging towards you, that actually makes you a massive target. It's the easiest thing to hit. Yeah. So it just makes the Americans very vulnerable if they're in that narrow stretch of sea.
Although one thing I hadn't appreciated, but Larissa Brown, our defence editor at the Times, had a really interesting piece in the paper today talking about, actually, I hadn't considered the intelligence benefit to having some of these aircraft carriers there, and the amount of hoovering up of signals that they do as well is a benefit to having them bobbing off the coast of Iran as well. Which I
mean, they have multiple purposes. So it'll be helpful to have them around there. But, to be honest, they already have a huge presence in Bahrain and lots of the countries surrounding Iran.
Can I ask a follow-up question, which is from Jonathan, about getting us back to the possible talks? He says, why would you want to do a deal with this regime? Won't they just be stringing Trump along? I guess you've got there both a question of their reliability, but also the question of, will they be in place for long?
Well, that's a great question. In terms of Iran's reliability, for Trump, it would be a great success. He criticised the JCPOA when Obama did that nuclear deal, criticised it for years, said it was a complete disaster, tore it up when he was in charge because he was convinced he could get a better deal. So if he can, this for him would be a legacy issue.
And that was the deal which put caps on what Iran could do with enriching uranium in exchange for relief on sanctions.
Yeah. And to be fair to the Iranians, it's an unpleasant regime in many respects, but they did actually sort of seem to stick to the letter of that deal. And we had experts on the ground monitoring their nuclear enrichment. They've signed up to the Non-Proliferation Treaty too, and they seem to be sort of acting within those limits because of the deal. And some sanctions were lifted. It was better for their economy. It was sort of a win-win on all sides. The problem with this is when you've sort of marched an armada up to the shore, chances are, that the first nuclear deal took months and months and months of to and fro. It took a long time to get to a place where both sides could agree to terms that weren't so unreasonable they'd be broken in 2 minutes.
Yes.
If you're doing a deal in such a hurry with a gun to your head, the details aren't going to be there. It's going to be really hard to see what it actually achieves and how likely it is to work. In terms of how long will this regime even last, that's another great question because the Ayatollah is in his late 80s. Everyone in Iran is already thinking about succession and where that goes. But we don't know. And at the moment, despite all the protests, it is a regime that's hung on through an awful lot. It has this entire apparatus around it. It has the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC. It has an entire system that is built around propping up the regime. And it's not just a matter of, like with Maduro, you could go and take away a couple of figures at the top and then it topples. It doesn't. It's an entire state you'd have to dismantle.
But we've got the example from last year of Syria and the way that dissembled so quickly. Are there any parallels with that? Even though I take your point, there is this enormous apparatus that if everyone all of a sudden feels that the wind is blowing in the right direction, that can just collapse.
It's like that great quote about going bankrupt. First it happens slowly and then it happens very, very fast.
Exactly, yeah.
It's like that. But, if you think about Syria, I was reporting on it when it first began back in 2012.
The Civil War, not the country.
The Civil War, but I mean, I'm not that old, Luke. However I look. But, when the Civil War started, there were exactly that thing of there were a bunch of very senior generals who defected, thinking the moment you start to dismantle the bits of the apparatus around you, the security apparatus, the state can't last. it lasted for a very, very long time. And a really bloody civil war. It took more than a decade for that to finally dismantle. So it's never an easy ask.
We will see what happens then. Let's move on to ICE. Donald Trump, of course, has been cracking down hard in Minnesota, and we've seen something of a bit of a U-turn at the moment. Our colleague Louise Callahan is a foreign correspondent at the Sunday Times. She's been in Minneapolis this week, and she sent us this voice note because she has seen the shift that we have had in the last week or so, where the Trump administration has been gung-ho, and then it hasn't been.
Hi, Manveen and Luke. So I arrived at the place where Alex Peretti was killed last Saturday, about 5-10 minutes after he was shot. And it was incredibly tense. The whole city actually has just been really on the edge. So many people who I spoke to described the feeling in Minneapolis at the moment as if they're under occupation. So since Alex Peretti was killed, then the administration has been in kind of a fix because this is really cut through with a lot of people who voted for Trump, and the polls really show that. So there was a poll this month which showed that 61% of respondents, and that's from every political party, believed that ICE actions had gone too far. Now, the president obviously reads polls a lot and constantly watches the news coverage of himself. And he's clearly clocked that this doesn't look good. And he is taking some steps to change it. But honestly, I don't think that his climb down has been that significant. He's made some nods in the directions of saying, okay, we should send some of the ICE officers back to change the leadership in the area. Okay, but fundamentally, they're still there. They're still making arrests. They're still working. So while I think Trump is making some kind of conciliatory statements, I don't think we can say that this is a U-turn by any stretch of the imagination.
Thanks to Louise for that. And the sort of U-turn has been that this very out front border control commander, Greg Bovino, for it is he, has been pulled out, sent back to California where he was working, and there's even some reports that he might retire soon. And in his place, you've got Tom Homan, who's another border czar, and sort of more conciliatory language from Donald Trump that maybe they won't be, they want to be de-escalating. Lots of calls this week with Minnesota lawmakers suggesting compromise and understanding and less all caps tweets like we were talking about with Iran.
So what do you make of that? Do you think this is, as Louise said, sort of a cosmetic climb down? Or do you think this is a real change?
Not sure. There was one of our colleagues, Kieran Southern, who's been reporting from the city, who's talked about actually some of those local politicians have already been out there saying this is the end of things. But actually, ICE raids and arrests are still happening. There was a judgment put out by the chief federal judge in Minnesota yesterday, pointing out that ICE has violated nearly 100 court orders which have been handed down to them this month alone, related to people trying to contest the fact that they've been arrested wrongly or what have you. So a lot of this is still happening. But I was thinking earlier about why this has happened with Alex Peretti and it didn't happen with Renee Good.
Isn't that interesting? Because when it was Renee Good, I did think, this is a white woman, a soccer mum, effectively. Surely this will shake America's soul. But it wasn't the moment when things broke. So what's your theory?
I think it's because the video is so much clearer with Alex Peretti.
Yeah.
So with Renee Good's death, there could be an argument, if you were the border control agents, that she was in a car, the agent was in front of the car, she did lurch forward. Lots of people say, well, she was clearly trying to steer away and get out, but they were saying, no, she was using her vehicle as a weapon. So there's a bit of grey area. Whereas the videos, the multiple angles of Alex Peretti being forced to the ground, you see him being disarmed, the gun that was still holstered being thrown away, and the person looming over him who actually fired the first shots looking down. They might not have directly seen it, but you'd think they would have done. It's just so clear. And so when you then have people like Kristi Noem, the Secretary for the Department for Homeland Security, saying he approached these federal agents brandishing a weapon intent on massacre, and then you see those videos, the disconnect is so clear. And maybe it's the gun thing as well, because actually I was talking on the radio earlier in the week to someone who is a kind of gun rights person in Minnesota, and they were absolutely furious about it.
Yeah, who were great supporters of Donald Trump and great supporters of the Republican Party.
Kate has asked us a question saying, how much training do ICE agents receive? Because this has been quite a big question, because Kristi Noem, the DHS secretary, has said, they've just been following the protocol, and people are saying, well, there's been a massive expansion of ICE recently. So actually how much protocol is in their head that they can follow. And there's been some really good reporting from The Atlantic in particular, who have talked about what has actually happened with this big push to get more people onto the books. The training has gone down from 150 days down to 47. Now it's 42. So compare that. So for the Metropolitan Police here in the UK, it's 250 days to be fully operational in the Met Police and 2 years for police constable training in total.
And they're not even armed.
Yeah, exactly. They're not even armed in the Met Police necessarily, But also you've seen a number of retirees from ICE come back into the force. I was hearing from someone on the radio earlier in the week who had been an ICE commander who was itching to get back involved. They were seeing that was all that was going on and were pushing to get back in because now they can go and it won't affect their pension. They can earn a salary on top of their pension. But some of those have been concerns about, well, they might be in jobs that aren't necessarily the things that they have experience of.
And one of the things that's really alarmed people about ICE agents is they don't have to carry ID. They don't have a badge in the way that policemen do. They often wear masks and they're armed. I mean, they feel a bit like armed vigilantes almost.
Yeah.
And they've got that sort of the look and the attitude, that sort of really gung-ho, I'm now entitled to take aim at anything.
And some people would say this is what happens when they've hired 12,000 new staff in 4 months. Now, of course, lots of those are not necessarily the people out on the streets with weapons out on immigration enforcement raids. They might be sort of office staff and legal staff, but still, that's an enormous expansion. And if you think how hiring works in any big organisation,
there will have been no filtering there.
You think what kind of filtering has happened there? But actually, on your point about wearing the masks and everything, that of course is what some Democrats are pushing to add to this bill to extend how much the government can spend.
In the last 24 hours, I think they've been saying no more masks and also asking for them all to carry body cams so that we don't have this question of were they really hit
or and turn them on, because some of them do have body cams but they're not on. Lots of people have been getting in touch as well about the impact of all of this on the political scene, because they have their midterm elections which will be happening later on this year. One person asking, are Republicans concerned about the impact that these 2 ICE killings will have on those upcoming elections? Of course, Louise did mention that the president is acutely aware of how he is being reported and people's views on him. And actually, some polls have shown that lots of Americans are not happy with how ICE are doing things, but do support the kind of base cause of cracking down on the number of illegals in the country.
Yeah. I think what'll be interesting is watching what the Republican Party does. So in the last few days, we've even had Republican senators coming out and writing pieces criticising ICE, because I think it's that thing of if you're a supporter of gun rights, this doesn't help you. And it's going to start tearing bits of the party apart in the run-up to the midterms. And that's what could be really dangerous for President Trump. So, Luke, like Keir Starmer, we've sort of looked at the rest of the world, but we're bringing it back home because actually everything...
We've spent too long abroad.
We've spent too long abroad, and everything that's happening in the world, even if it feels like it's falling apart, is actually about Westminster.
Yes.
And that's the pivot we're trying to make as inelegantly as he does.
It's all very well about Beijing and Iran. What about Gorton and Denton?
What about Gorton and Denton? It's been quite a week.
Yeah, so we've had the question with the standing down of the MP for Gorton and Denton, the question of this by-election, who is going to fill it? Now, obviously for months, certain people, Andy Burnham, have been talking about Andy Burnham, the Greater Manchester Mayor, and how he might tilt at the leadership, what with there being lots of unhappiness about Keir Starmer. Obviously, this is the perfect opportunity. Here's a by-election, one you will easily win. It's his patch, and as actually Patrick Maguire said on our sister podcast, The State of It, when you look at Andy Burnham's success in the Greater Manchester area, it's not just that he won every borough, he won pretty much every ward. It is North Korean levels of success that he's had in Greater Manchester. But Keir Starmer obviously had other ideas, and the NEC, of which is stacked with lots of his supporters, voted the other day to actually block him from standing. Their argument being, well, you're the Greater Manchester Mayor, and our rules say that you would have to give up being Greater Manchester Mayor if you were to become the MP for Gorton and Denton. And we don't want to have to run 2 elections. So this by-election and then also another election for the Greater Manchester Mayor. We don't have the money, and we might also be a bit worried about losing that mayoralty, which is Quite an incredible thing to say,
Yeah.
a year and a bit into a landslide Labour government.
Although they now stand the prospect, potentially, of losing that by-election.
Yeah.
How bad would that be for...
Reform and the Greens are the ones sort of itching for it. And
And
I
putting
guess,
up, sort of, as far as they're concerned, stellar candidates.
yes, two things about that, though. Someone did point out the other day that actually if the Greens were very confident about it, Zach Polanski would be there. And he would be wanting to stand in that seat. He's from
Good
that part
point.
of the world, would like to get to Westminster. And the other thing that Labour are quite confident about is that they actually have an enormous machine in that part. They have data, they have door-knocking receipts going back years and years and years. The Greens and the Reform Party will be starting further back on that front. So
Yeah.
Labour will be confident on that. But
Although both the Greens and Labour can't quite tell how it's going to work out because we think George Galloway might end up running too,
Of
which will again
course.
split the left.
yeah.
Luke, we've got a question from John, which is about by-elections.
Mm.
He says, I'm not really concerned about who defects, how many or why, but surely such defectors have an obligation to the people who elected them. The question must be asked as to whether they were elected as individuals or as party members. And if it's the latter, then surely a by-election should be triggered. And this, of course, refers to, we've had a succession of these defections in the last few days. We've had Robert Jenrick, followed very quickly by Suella Braverman. Lots of big Tories suddenly crossing the aisle to reform.
Yes. So on the question of by-elections as a result of defections, why are we not having another by-election because of people like Robert Jenrick and Suella Braverman moving across? Well, it is just the case that you are elected as a person, so you can be elected as a Labour MP and then become a Conservative MP. Nigel Farage, for it is he, was angry about this as far back as 2022 when Christian Wakeford, remember him? He was a Conservative MP who crossed the floor to join Labour back when Labour was in the ascendancy. And Nigel Farage said on his GB News programme, it's not right, it's dishonourable to do, it's a complete insult to voters for MPs to have the arrogance to think it is them they voted for, when the truth is we vote for or against the main party leaders. Of course,
He's not saying that now.
he has changed his tune. And actually his argument is that since then we've seen lots of people defecting and there haven't been by-elections and that's just not the way anymore. And so back in 2014 when you had people like Douglas Carswell defecting from the Tories to Nigel Farage's previous outfit, UKIP, he did stand in a by-election. Mark Reckless as well defected to UKIP. He also triggered a by-election.
Out of a sense of duty rather than
And they
the
both
rules.
won.
Yeah.
But then since then, when we've had people like Christian Wakeford defecting to Labour, Dan Poulton, Natalie Elphick joining from the Tories, there weren't by-elections triggered then. So Farage's point is, well, all these people in the years since have not been doing it. This is clearly the way. So actually, why are we going to stick our neck on the line and do something different?
There is something in that. I think a lot of people, when they do go to the polls, they often don't know very much about their candidate.
No.
They are voting on party lines. So in a way, I wonder if it's time we talked a bit more about changing the convention around this and making it compulsory for people to have to face a by-election.
Can I quote James Callaghan at you?
Oh, I think you should.
So
Sonny Jim.
It used to be the case that actually it was only the candidates' names that appeared on the ballot paper. It didn't even say party. So you were meant to know that Manveen Rana was the
You were meant to know who each
representative.
candidate was.
Yeah. And he said...
And I think it used to have their profession next to it. So, it
Exactly.
would be-
So Jim Callaghan said when he was making this change to actually include the party on the ballot paper in 1968, he said, at the moment the ballot paper merely says that a candidate is a merchant or a gentleman or a farmer or whatever it may be. Is it not more relevant to claim that the candidate is a Conservative or Labour candidate?
Yeah. And now I sort of feel like it's gone the other way, actually. People very rarely know very much about the person they're voting for.
Oh, 100%, yeah. I've got another question from Michael. Is it a failure of Starmer's communications operation that the notion that he is finished is now widely accepted when he's not even halfway through his premiership? Arguably his team have lacked a characterful, dynamic personality with clear principles. What could they have done differently?
It does feel like they've played the game of politics quite badly. You know, you constantly hear that Keir Starmer doesn't spend very much time with his backbenchers, barely knows them. And if you think about every big defeat they've had, it's because they haven't been able to bring their own backbenchers with them.
But that is now changing. So he's got his new number 10 aide Amy Richards, daughter of Steve Richards, of course, the columnist. And one of her whole things is getting him in front of backbenchers.
Yeah.
They've been hordes of them coming down to Checkers to have
Tea
food,
parties and
everything. He's been pressing the flesh, and yet still.
But he should have done that 2 years ago.
Yeah.
To be this far into a premiership without really knowing your own party that well might explain why they've lost so many votes.
But I guess Keir Starmer, one of the things he'd like to blow the trumpet about is what he'd see as his successes on the world stage. But I don't know, do you think people care about that when they see him going to the US and having a really good meeting with Donald Trump and getting a better deal on tariffs than some of our European neighbours? I mean, does that register with voters when inflation's still relatively high?
In a way, that's a classic example of him not being very good at the message. So if that is the message he wants to give and sort of say, look, I'm making the running on the international stage at a time when the world is changing, I'm trying to cement our place, he's failing to say it. He went to China and still ended up talking about supermarket prices because he's so desperate to convince people at home this is all about domestic politics, rather than being brave enough to say, we all feel the terror of the world changing around us. Maybe we should be spending a bit of time making sure we have a say. And we've got one last question. It's from Simon, who says, in the last 20 years, pandemic accepted, political leaders in the UK have failed completely in setting out a clear vision for the country and in keeping it high on the agenda and in the public consciousness. Why is this, and what can be done about it? And he adds, this, in my humble opinion, is why we needed Burnham at the helm. There we go.
Back to Burnham.
An endorsement for Burnham there. But what is the answer? It's a big question. One we should almost be asking the politicians. We came as close to that as we could, though, by asking one of our favourite political correspondents, chief political correspondent to The Times, Aubrey Allegretti.
Hi, Manveen and Luke. I would say that the evolution of media scrutiny, things like 24-hour news, instant reaction and technology making leaks and communication lightning fast are some of the elements responsible for this. I've often heard it said that the Good Friday Agreement negotiations, where parties were obviously kept separate and carefully drip-fed information, would be impossible in the age of WhatsApp. Politicians find themselves buffeted by events and aren't necessarily devoid of conviction, but they get so caught up in fixing small holes as they appear that they struggle to bend the state to their will in a meaningful way. I think it's also true that Britain's influence on the world stage has declined over decades, meaning we're increasingly prone to shocks overseas, whether that be the gas prices spike caused by the war in Ukraine or humanitarian crises driving mass migration. Keir Starmer's probably come to realise in his 21 months in office how bending the state to one's will is much harder than it sounds. Not only do you need a vision, you also need a plan, and having one without the other will leave you high and dry. I think there's yet to be a real reckoning with the electorate, a killing of sacred cows, or being honest about some of the big trade-offs. And until that comes to pass, politicians will continue to muddle through from one set of fiscal forecasts or a general election cycle to the next.
Aubrey was saying technology and the speed of all of this. I wonder if that also makes it much harder to have a big vision. We've had a few governments successively saying growth was their big thing, but people never really feel it. And I think in an age where, because of technology, we're so used to getting immediate results. If I want to buy something, I can order it now, it'll be with me in a few hours. You're used to almost instant delivery. So when people say growth and 3 years down the line, you still don't feel like you're much richer.
Yes.
It's much harder to see through a big political vision and a big political plan and keep people with you. And I think that's part of the problem of modern living.
Especially if you add to that enormous road projects or rail projects or HS2
Which
or Northern Powerhouse Rail.
Take forever and seem to take longer and longer as they go along.
Well, thank you, Aubrey, for answering that for us, and to Simon as well for your question. I think that's about it from us.
Yeah, thanks so much for writing in. Do send in more questions as and when you have them. We're at thestory@thetimes.com.
Today we heard from Aubrey Allegretti, Chief Political Correspondent for The Times, and Louise Callaghan, Foreign Correspondent at The Sunday Times. Thank you to them.
Our producer was Sophie McNulty. The executive producer was Tim Walklate. And theme composition is by Mal Lassetto.
She's been Manveen Rana. I've been Luke Jones. Leave us a glowing review if you'd like, wherever you're listening to this podcast. And if you didn't enjoy it, keep that to yourself. We'll be back with normal service.
Don't put that in the comments.
Bye-bye.